In today's video, I'm going to show you how to properly install components into your arrows. So gluing points and pins inside of arrows may not seem like a very complicated task, and in fact, it's actually quite easy if you follow a couple simple rules. So there are some things to be careful of while gluing points in, or pins for that matter. It really doesn't matter. Both of them, you really need to make sure you are gluing them in the exact same manner between each arrow. So your entire dozen arrows are all built the same. But also you need to make sure that they are glued in completely. If they are not, you run the risk of losing components when you pull arrows out of targets, which I've seen happen to a lot of people. Also, what you need to be careful of, and this is why I'm showing you this video, is to show you how to build better, more accurate arrow shafts.
You're watching the Jake Kaminsky YouTube channel.
If you're new here, my name's Jake Kaminsky. I'm a two-time Olympic silver medalist in the sport of archery, and I'm working to make this channel a great resource to all types of archery, from form to tuning, equipment setup, and many other things. So if you haven't by now, hit that subscription button and the notification bell. That way you're notified every time a new video is uploaded. I'm uploading a lot of content lately, and you don't want to miss out on what's coming out. Ultimately, I'm just trying to make you a better archer and give you information that I wish I had when I was growing up. I also want to mention really quick and thank my Patreon supporters, because with their support, I'm allowed to produce so much free content for everybody else out there to enjoy. So if you're interested in becoming a Patreon member, there's a bunch of exclusive benefits that they get. There's actually a Discord server there as well now, so that way we can chat amongst each other and ultimately build a little bit of a small community to help each other get better. I'll put a link in the description below, plus there'll be a card up at the top here for you to click on. So what you need to be careful of is having loose components in your shafts. So if you listen, and if it doesn't get picked up by the mic the way I have it now, I'll do a close-up. But if I throw this arrow down on the table, which is on a padded surface, you can hear it rattle. So you can hear that rattle, and also you can hear this one rattle. But this arrow with properly installed components just makes a dead sound. So, what is this telling us? This is telling us that this arrow has enough glue completely around the shank of the point and the entirety of the actual pin itself inside the shaft. So what these are doing that this one's not doing is we're hearing the component rattling inside of the arrow shaft. That's what that high-pitched pinging sound is. So everybody that's watching this video, and this is a very common thing by the way, you can take your arrows and drop them on carpet. You hit with your point first, so it kind of whips back and forth. Just doing that is enough to hear if your components are loose. In addition to potentially losing your points in arrows, having loose components will actually degrade the performance of your arrows. So as the arrow is flexing and flying down range, it's doing a flex pattern due to the archer's paradox. A little bit less so in compound, definitely more so in recurve and barebow and traditional. And what is happening is this arrow is oscillating back and forth at a relatively high frequency. And this arrow and this arrow will not oscillate at the same frequency. Now, obviously, because this is an X10 and this is a Pro Tour, they're two different arrows. But if this arrow didn't rattle and this arrow did, these arrows would not oscillate the same as they're flying down range. So why that is this vibration, this rattling of the components inside the arrow is going to affect the dynamic flex of this actual arrow. So as the arrow is flying down range, the flex pattern of the arrow is going to start to change due to the rattling component. And so what that's going to do is it can potentially open your groups up and degrade your performance. So that means that this arrow, if it rattled and this arrow didn't, they may not group together. So it's really important to make sure all of your arrows have all of the components completely glued in place. It's actually a very simple task, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So all you really need is a propane torch, a pair of pliers, and some hot melt. Now, I don't recommend the brittle hot melt, so the ones that you couldn't flex. Like this one's very flexible. It is specifically designed for arrows though, because the melting point is a little bit higher than some of the other hot melts that are available out there, like at craft stores. So I always recommend getting the ones that are designed for arrows. However, don't get the ones that are stiff that you can't bend at room temperature. What I've found is at very, very low temperatures, especially archers shooting up north in the wintertime, the glue becomes so hard and brittle when it impacts the target, it cracks it free, and then their points just pop right out, even with a properly glued in component. So I recommend the flexible stuff. Now, I recommend a propane torch with a little pencil tip, not the big giant ones that people use to solder copper together. Those can put just too much heat into the actual arrow itself, and you can actually damage the arrow. So just the tiny little pencil one. This one has a little bit lazier of a flame compared to what I would really like. I like the ones that really just have a nice fine pencil point. And if you don't have a propane torch or the little tip, a starter or a pair of pliers, hot melt, things like that, I'll put a link in the description below on where you can get those. And those are Amazon affiliate links. So when you do click on those, I do get a percentage of the sales due to the Amazon affiliate program. And anything you buy within 24 hours, I also get a bit of a credit for that. So when you're doing your standard Amazon shopping, clicking those links, you're helping this channel out, and it allows me to produce more free content for everybody to enjoy at home. Okay, so really simple. All you got to do, fire your torch up. I got to pull these components out, and then I'm going to show you how to glue them. So as you can see, this flame is quite lazy. It's just not the pinpoint pencil point that I really would like to see. But this is what I have, so I'm going to make it work for you guys so you can see what I'm doing. So these stainless points, the shanks are quite long. They take a lot of heat to actually get out. Well, at least if they're glued in properly. Obviously, these are rattling around, so it may be a bit easier to get them out. So when you're heating up components, I never would recommend doing this. Don't heat the carbon. If you're heating the carbon, you can really damage the arrow. So just staying on the shank of the point is enough to heat up the hot melt that's inside to actually extract the component if you have to re-glue it in or replace them. So don't heat your carbon. That'll cause a whole lot of issues, and ultimately it's just going to destroy your arrows. So I'm going to take out both the point and the pin just in case the pin is the culprit. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's both. So it really depends. But for this, the pins are made out of aluminum. They transfer heat much faster, so you don't really need much of a flame. Actually, when I'm doing all my repairs and tournaments with pins, I just use a lighter because that's really all you need for these. But for the points, especially the stainless points, you really need a fair bit of heat to get them out. Okay, so now that I have the components out, all I need to do is I will hold a component in a pair of pliers like this. Now, usually what I would recommend is to grab the step that is on the pin itself. You don't want to grab the pin where I'm grabbing it like this, because you can mar up the actual spot where the pin slides in or where the knock slides on, and your knock won't fit correctly. So you really should grab it here on that raised section. Don't grab it out there. And all you need is some hot melt, and you want to position it so you're ready to go so you can install it right away without any sort of delay. You preheat the actual component. Now, when you take the component out of the package and they're brand new, sometimes there can be some oils on them. And what I recommend is when you're heating it, you may see a bit of a white haze that is burning off as you're heating it up. You have to at least heat it up until all that haze is gone. That's just making sure all the moisture is gone and everything, and it's up to enough of a temperature to start to melt this hot melt. So I heat up the pin just a little bit. I start getting the hot melt itself a little bit molten, not quite bubbling because that'd be way too hot. And all I do is I get it near the end of the actual component. So I'm going to slow this down so you can actually see it. But you can see how it is on the end of the component here, but it's not on the very end. There's a little bit on the very end, and what we don't want is an excess amount of glue on the very tip, because as we put them into different arrows, we may get more hot melt inside of one than the other. And so that's going to change the mass weight of this arrow, and that's not what we want. We want every arrow to be basically the same weight, because different weight projectiles means different impact points on the target, especially at long distance. So I'm going to reheat this real quick since I've been talking, and then I'm going to spin it on and off, in and out as I'm putting it on. And what that's going to do is make a perfect even coat of glue all the way around the shaft itself. I'll show you close-ups of this afterwards, and then once I'm done, I push the point and pin in, and I hold it. I'm holding it until it coagulates and cools just enough. And then you can dunk this in like a coffee cup full of cool water. Or all you can do is you take the arrow and you store it like this on the pin, and the weight of the arrow is enough to keep the pin in. So by the time this cools, it will be fully glued in. If you don't store it like this and you were to store it this way with the component facing up, especially if you have the point in already or the other side is already glued in, the air pressure inside is going to be increasing because you just installed a hot component, and as that builds, it's going to start pushing the molten component back out. So your point won't be installed all the way if you don't store it like this. Hot melt really does not take that long to cool down. It really shouldn't take long at all, especially if you're not adding too much heat. If it takes forever to cool down or you're melting your table or things like that, you're putting too much heat into it, and ultimately you are risking damaging your shafts. So while this back end is cooling, I'm going to install the point. So it's the same thing. This point is probably still hot for me taking it out because it's stainless, retains a lot of heat. I'm not going to really worry about touching it other than grabbing it on the point like this. Now again, I'm going to heat everything up. Make sure that the hot melt that was existing on the shank of this point is molten enough. And I'm not going to be too afraid of putting a little bit of heat into the point. The stainless points are a little tricky to get in because the shanks are so long. So you do have to put a decent amount of heat in it. And then again, you've got to get your glue near the end of the shank. Not on the very tip, but definitely as close to the end as humanly possible. And you definitely want to make sure you're getting your glue into the spots of where your break-offs are. If you don't, that's a big source of where the rattling could be coming from. And I'm going to, again, the same thing. Heat everything up. Get the hot melt nice and warm. You got to rotate it sometimes because it'll want to drip off. And ultimately, I'm just trying to keep this warm enough to stay liquid. So when I'm putting it on again, I'm spinning it on and off and going in and out a few times until I get it all the way down. And then I'm going to hold it until it cools down enough. So I'm going to set this aside behind me with the point, the arrow weight on the point, and then I'm going to show you some of the close-up footage as I'm re-gluing this arrow's components in. And then once everything is all cool, we'll drop these on the table and see if it sounds any different. Okay, I'm going to do the whole process again, just so that way you can see it up close. So get your torch started, and I'm rotating it as I'm pulling it off. Really helps speed things up. Get the component out. I already got the pin out or off, or the knock off, so now turn the flame down, get it pulled off. All right, so I lay everything in a manner so I can really just glue everything together quickly. I've got it again on the actual raised section, so I preheat it some. Get the hot melt starting as well. Get it on the end of the actual pin, but not the tip. I don't want a ton on the tip, if any. Start getting it warm. And then when I put it on, I'm spinning it in and out, on and off. And then push it down and hold it. Hold it till it cools a little bit, and then we'll do the point. So again, now I've got the point end of the shaft pointing this direction. I've got the point here ready to go right in as easy as possible. Get a little bit more heat going, obviously because this shank is so long. As you can see, there's almost no glue inside of this nut spot, but there's a lot inside of there. So it could have been rattling out here. Get some hot melt going. I would do this over a table. Do not do this over your legs, especially if you're in shorts. I've had molten hot melt stick to my skin before, and if anybody else has out there, it is not fun, so be careful. I've got enough hot melt on here. As you can see, I've got some inside the groove there and a fair bit of amount on the end here. So all I'm going to do is get this warmed back up. You're going to see it bubble. That's pretty much warm enough, but because these are stainless points, I'm going to make sure that it's nice and warm. See how I'm turning it over to keep the glue on the point itself so it's not dripping off? And then watch closely here. As I get it on, I'm spinning it on and off, in and out like this. This is the secret. You get it down to the end and you hold it. Hold it down. I'm going to store it behind me upright like this, and I'm going to show you how to take hot melt off on the arrow that we already installed. All right, now we're done with the torch. Turn that off, set it aside. Now let me show you how to take hot melt off. Do not ever push the hot melt that direction to take off the hot melt. You can wipe off the excess when it's molten. I don't like to do that though. I like to let it coagulate and cool down like this, and then stripping it off is super simple. All you do is push it that direction towards the point. So you take it, and I'm just pushing it this direction towards the point away from the shaft, and it peels off in a perfect donut like that. So really easy and simple. You check to make sure the shaft and the butt of the point are touching and there's not a gap. And again, the same thing with the pin. I'm just going to pull it towards the pin. Done. Look at that. Super simple. Go that way, and you risk catching some of the carbon and stripping a whole strip of carbon off your arrows. I've done it before. Don't make that mistake. Just pull it towards the component away from the arrow shaft. That's the best way to do it. Now this one is not quite cool. The pin is. Again, pull it back. Super simple. The point's a little warm, so the hot melt's kind of gooey. See how it doesn't really want to come off? It's just sticky. That's why I let it cool all the way, so that way it comes off in one nice little donut. You can still kind of pull it off, but it's just a mess, as you can see. So let it cool completely. That's where a cup of water comes in handy because it cools pretty quick. That's easy. Make sure it's something that can withstand some temperature because sometimes these points can get pretty warm. Okay, so now that I have the components glued in correctly, we're going to drop the arrow and see if it still rattles. So this one didn't rattle before. And now this one doesn't rattle either. So now we're going to check and see if this arrow rattles now that the components are properly installed. So as you can tell, when you drop it on a soft surface, there is no rattle going on because the components are completely glued in place the way that they're supposed to. And this arrow will fly and group just like all the other arrows that have the components installed correctly.
Thanks for watching, and thank you to my Patreon supporters. If you want to become a Patreon supporter or check out books, apparel, and some seminar info, head to jkaminski.com, and be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to be notified every time a new video is uploaded. And I appreciate you watching. Thank you again.